Hello, welcome to the Viking Codecast. Back from hiatus. My name is Erik Trautman. I'm the founder of Viking Code School, and we are an fully online, immersive, and now part-time web development school where we teach the fundamentals of software engineering and prepare people for a career in software. So joining us today, the Codecast is a weekly series where we bring in experienced developers to give all sorts of interesting, eclectic knowledge from the other side of the line. Life behind the curtain and the perspective of all sorts of interesting stuff, and occasionally some really useful tidbits on everything from careers to technical topics to every now and then we're lucky to be graced with someone who has a little bit of experience in the design side of the world and the product side of the world, as we do today. So our guest today is Jane Portman, who's who's definitely probably more tired than she looks, out in Russia right now. Who runs the UI Breakfast and is going to talk to us all about different things along the product spectrum, which is, again, something that we don't always get to hear about, and is definitely something that's really, really important for developers to understand and for engineers to understand working as part of a team. So I'm really excited to hear from you, Jane, and welcome aboard to the Viking Codecast.
Thank you for the nice intro, Erik. I'm thrilled to be on board. Can everybody hear me well?
Sure can.
Great.
Yeah, well, I guess as always, the first question that I'd love to pose to you is just how did you get to where you are right now, and what exactly are you working on these days?
All right, so I'm a UI UX consultant, helping SaaS founders build nice, simple, focused, and profitable products. That is, I've been a designer all my life. Over the course of 8 years, up to 4 years ago, I spent 8 years in an agency, growing up from a junior UI designer towards a creative director. Then I had my first son, and I realized that I don't want to do agency work anymore, and I just want to do my best stuff. And I made a big goal of conquering online clients and the US market. So I started out doing all kinds of work, spent a year on Odesk, that forbidden word, quickly realized that there is a very, very low ceiling there, and started building my authority. I started out with a book called Mastering App Presentation, which made me zero money, but was a perfect way to, get good clients way better than Odesk, and started going to conferences and blogging and podcasting, got off the ground with productized consulting as well. And so these days I consider myself a pretty well-established consultant, and just launched my new book called the UI Audit, which it's not even a lead magnet for my consulting work. It's a self-sufficient product helping founders solve their design problems. So I love helping people about design, and my angle is functionality, product strategy, and all kinds of things that make product not just pretty but really functional and easy to use.
Cool. So as I mentioned, there's a wealth of things that engineers could learn that are obviously important to their careers, coming from the product side, because typically the reason you're building something is because there's a product, and I think that's underappreciated a lot of times. When all you really want to do is just work on a challenging problem and get paid for it, and somehow it's very easy to forget that oops, there's a product leading the way. But on the other side, I know that a lot of our audience is really curious about designing their own products, about starting businesses, about joining small startups or starting small startups. So I guess kind of the first thing that I'm interested in is, given the work that you've done so far, working with lots of different companies, where do we kind of start about thinking about the meaning of product to someone who is technically oriented?
All right. First, I'd love to give a compliment to all technical founders and developers who are doing any kind of UI UX design themselves, meaning hacking products together. You actually make really good UX designers most times, not fantastic, but very, very sensible, because you have that logic, how everything works, and you also have a ton of experience working with other software, and you have that library of patterns in your mind, which you don't even realize most times, which allows you to be more successful than non-technical founders. Sometimes you can just see whether it was a non-technical founder or developer building the UI. So kudos on that. And really, it's not that hard to build a UI. It's all about a few very simple things like a few object lists, simple navigation, etc., etc. The hard thing usually is to make sure that this is exactly what the user needs, and that's where product strategy comes in place. So one of our big topics for today was product strategy. And shall I dive into that?
Oh yeah. You mean we can't just build it and they'll come?
Kind of, yeah. There's so many apps out there still waiting for the audience, and that's not a big place to be, really. So my method of defining product strategy consists of 4 parts. It is audience, the number of people you're building it for, their big goals that they're striving to accomplish with your app, daily tasks that they do when they log into your app every day, and objects that they manage within that. And the combination of these objects, it's pretty simple, but when you write down, you instantly realize who you're going to be targeting and what exactly you need to facilitate most. And sometimes it needs just a few guiding principles to rule your decisions, and such strategy should definitely be like hanging on top of your head, above your desk somewhere, so that whenever you're trying to optimize a screen or decide like whether to introduce a feature or not, just look at the strategy and see whether it aligns with it or not.
So if I'm running let's say I'm running a code school online, how do I begin to think about approaching these 4 principles? Like, where do I start? And
of course you start with an audience, right? It should be a group of people who you're building it for, and actually it's quite scary to niche down, but it's rather necessary. And you need to make sure that you know these people well, you know what they need, you know that they have a problem that you'll be solving, and you also need to be sure that they can pay you afterwards, because if there are some kinds of audiences that are specifically not used to paying, especially consumer apps, people who do like entertainment part of their life, not the business part of their life. They're very hard to make them pay. So you want to make sure they can pay you. You want to make sure you like them, you know them, and that's rather important because that's going to define the next 3 items.
okay, and then where do I go next?
All right.
I understand my audience.
You need to figure out what is the big goal that they are working towards. So for the code school, that would definitely be, building your own business as a developer, or getting a superior job, or whatever it is for the majority of the students. And let's look at the daily tasks. People want, let's say, to consume lessons. They want to, I don't know, browse your agenda. What else do they do?
Anyone here who uses our site? What do you guys do daily on the site? Any volunteers for a little bit of user research?
I guess I'm muted. I guess readings and I guess not code challenges, but code assignments and sort of guidelines for those, I guess.
Okay, so you're consuming a lot of information, definitely.
All right, so the first step would be figuring out what objects we are managing here, and usually we can usually it's going to be a list of nouns, and if you just browse through the previous list of tasks, you're going to see what nouns you're using there, and very, very likely these are going exactly to be the objects that you're managing in the app.
Can you talk a little bit more about what do you mean by an object?
Object, let's say it's a project management app. So the objects here would be projects, clients, files, notes, messages, stuff like that. It really depends on the scope. It helps to define the whole structure of the app, both development-wise and UI-wise.
Yeah, that's interesting because it sort of comes in line with the ERM approach, the entity relational modeling stuff.
Exactly.
Where when you design a database, from the very, very bottom, the guts of the app, you need to make those same considerations, right? As when you're designing the front end UI. So a lot of what we teach is about the back end, is about, identifying. So sort of starting from what we've been given by the UI. So a lot of times we're given a mock-up, and the mock-up has a whole bunch of stuff in it, and then we have to sort of dissect it and say, okay, well, hold on, what does it mean to have a blog post and a bunch of comments and a bunch of users and tags and things like that, and then sort of pulling that out and then turning that into some sort of database object. So you're talking about it from the other end, which is sort of from the perspective of someone who might actually be creating that mock-up. So that's a really interesting shift in perspective. So can you dive a little bit more maybe into how you break down these user needs and then turn that into an actual interface, and how you think about that user interface, that UI?
All right. So once we write down these things, we need to figure out what exactly our app is going to contain. And the essence of any web app is managing those objects that we listed. Usually these come into the shape of some kind of data tables or lists or something like that, and the whole old tasks that are going to be around them are just going to take place in the context of these lists. So my primary strategy for building simple apps is a rule of one data table per page, so that everything is super simple and obvious, not like piled up like we often see. So it's one table of objects per page, or one object per page. And the other thing about navigation, it also should be built around objects, not tasks. The most common mistake I see is people trying to pile up like action verbs in their navigation. And that's a really, really big mistake because the number of objects we're managing, it's large, but it's quite manageable. But the number of actions we can do around them is literally infinite. Like we can add, edit, delete, create, export, whatsoever, and a ton of other complex tasks. So while you're building your app, you need to just train your user where these things go, where they live, and then just make sure that all the remaining tasks are obvious from there. So it's a combination of actions that we want to promote and tasks and objects that we're going to be displaying within our UI. Hope that's clear.
Well, so I was actually just gonna say, do you have any examples where that might be the case, where like something concrete that we could sort of think around exactly what it means to differentiate in your nav between the objects and the verbs that you can do around those objects?
Mm-hmm. So
like maybe from one of your prior projects.
Right. Let's take that imaginary app, project management app. So the items in your navigation should be as simple as projects, contacts, maybe files, something like that. And each item should contain a very simple list, and all the actions around them should be accessible from that very list. And what we can do with them is really a huge number of options. Like big mistake is starting to add verbs there. For example, add new is a very popular thing that ends up in the navigation, and it's not a very good pattern, because once the thing is added, the user kind of doesn't know where it went and where it lives on a normal basis. So you need to train them to go to those primary locations. And big mistakes that I see also quite often is trying to replace the navigation with the dashboard itself. So people rely on dashboard a ton, but when the user drills in just for the first level of work, dashboard disappears, and all they see is that tiny little strip on top. So they should really be well trained for the common things, common place for things to live, and know exactly where everything is, and that they can come back anytime and do their editing or whatever they need.
Do you have any links? Anything that you might be able to show, maybe on your website? That I'd be happy to navigate to it, just to give people a visual that maybe they could they could see.
All right. Would you wait a second? I just
Oh yeah, sure.
I just published a blog post about navigation. Let me see. Okay, it was that was for. I'll just pile it in the chat. And there is a series on my site called UI Practicum where I dissect like separate UI problems, and I can also point you towards that.
Okay, so I
Just a
should.
second.
So I'm now sharing. I'm now sharing your post. So what can we take a look at?
Now you can scroll down, definitely. This thing that we're viewing here is the explanation why exactly it's good to build your navigation around objects and not tasks.
Why is that? Can you kind of explain what's going on?
So it's the only important the important message that this image conveys is that it's complex. There are only 3 types of apps, and now I just added all the actions that you can do with them, and we see the overwhelming number of actions possible. And if you try to add those, rectangle items in the drop-down menu, something like that, you're gonna end up with a real big mess. So what you want to do instead is just do this very simple navigation, which looks like project, contact, and files.
So in the prior work that you've done, what have you found to be the biggest mistakes that clients will typically make when they call you in to help them either develop a new UI or improve the one that they have?
Yeah, so navigation mistakes are definitely number 1, probably. Number 2 are very common mistakes about data tables, because data tables are essentially the core of the app most times, and the controls that people pile over all of these tables, the controls are really a big mess, while things definitely should have common places. Let me show you the link. Just a second. Okay, here is a blog post on my site, and there are some illustrations there. Yeah.
Okay. Where do you want me?
This picture is great.
Okay, perfect.
Right, so everything should really be very simple. There's a data table there, and so filters controlling what we're gonna see should go in the top left, and small settings, fine-tuning of the way things are displayed, should go on the right. So the what block, if you can see that, is on the left, and the how block is on the right.
Okay.
So everything related to search or drop-down filters should go there. Here's a image illustrating common problems with tabs. You can see that people have a ton of problems using tabs because they don't realize that everything below the tab line should relate to the tab header only, and everything above the line is common for all tab areas. This is rather simple, but you see a ton of mistakes around that. And also, people like to mess up with common controls. Here's an arrow that points to the right. I think, if you can move the mouse. Yeah. the tabs on the right side of the tabs lying. This is a very favorite place for people to put stuff into, and definitely nothing should go there because it's not obvious what exactly this relates to, whether it relates to all tabs, to stuff below the tab, or whatever. It's just not a good practice.
So what if you're working on a team that's working with engineers, what Do you typically like are there any issues that engineers often have that you run into as someone who's coming in? I don't know if you've come onto projects that never had a designer or a product person on them where it was just engineers. Is there any pitfalls that you typically see with that engineers get into that?
I don't know. I think what we did just describe is exactly what engineers do. Like my favorite kind of project is something that has been hacked together with a theme, has been live for like a year, has a stable flow of revenue already, and generally is validated, meaning, it's already an accomplished product. It just really lacks the polish when it comes to UX. So these are my favorite kind of clients, and I see these kinds of mistakes very often. And they really, if the product solves a big enough pain, such flaws in the UX are not critical anyways, because users will fight their way through to solving their problem. So really the biggest important thing that founders need to nail is the product market fit, which is matching the audience with the problem that they're experiencing and the tasks. Everything else is just visual polish. As founders say, it was probably Ankur Nagpal of Teachable who said that. He said that the product goes through several stages, from being not ugly to actually being beautiful. And the first, being not ugly, is totally enough for the product to exist and to be successful. And for that, I usually recommend using themes a ton, because that's hours and hours and hours of design work condensed into a single piece, which you can never hack together just being a developer.
Can you kind of explain what the idea of a theme is and where to find them and how to use them?
Bootstrap themes, stuff like that. Admin themes, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with the frameworks and the way they work. So it's a quick way to hack together any kind of UI. And of course, there are some problems with the themes because they're usually loaded with stuff. And when you apply it to simple projects, you kind of where are all the bells and whistles now? Like, where's the fancy dashboard? How to get like 20 parameters and a map on there if I don't need it? Like, what should go on my dashboard? Yeah, this is pretty common. But other than that, simple table styling, old stuff like that will make you towards your MVP pretty well.
Do you have a favorite theme or a favorite framework to use?
No, not really. In my book, I sent people to a couple sites. I don't quite remember which of those. I did some research, and as my friend said, not themes are created equal. But even if you don't like the framework itself, you can still pull like HTML, CSS, just design and apply it to your own, scheme of things. As well, if you don't like the whole thing. It still works because the designer made those, and appreciating good design and being able to recreate typography from scratch, these are two different skills, and probably most of people can appreciate stuff but probably cannot create it from scratch.
Well, and I think that something that we run into quite a bit with new engineers, and I'm sure there are those who are here right now, and then there are those who are in the audience who can probably relate to this, which is the engineering instinct is to always create everything because creation is great, but engineers are almost, especially engineers who are very logically oriented, sort of back-end focused and kind of dive into the nitty-gritty of code. There tends to be a bit of an inverse correlation between that and design ability and front-end coding ability. So it's always we teach some front-end CSS frameworks as well, like Bootstrap, as part of the curriculum, and the goal of that is definitely to say, don't worry about it. It's been solved. As long as you don't fight with Bootstrap, you can do just fine. So I'm glad to hear you backing us up on that.
Absolutely. One more thing I want to just make sure everyone understands, that to be successful, the product doesn't need to be creative. It doesn't have to be revolutionary, innovative, or whatever the terms people apply to design and to products. They don't have to be like that. They just have to conservatively solve a painful problem for the user. That's it. And it can be done through a very, very simple UI. And your goal is not to, do bells and whistles around or instead or whatever.
Well, so before we go any further, I want to open things up for questions. This is intended to be as collaborative as you'd like. Everyone who's viewing, everyone who's here, you guys are all welcome to drop in your 2 cents in whatever way you'd like. As far as how to do that, there's a little Q&A app on your viewer. I think it's on the top, and there's a drop down you hit. It's got a little blue Q&A item. Icon on it, but basically if you type a question in there, we'll be able to see it and we'll be able to ask it. If you're right here, you can just unmute and fire away.
I see. Now less populated with some questions.
John, were you
yeah, I have a question, and I hope Jane can handle this however she sees fit, but it kind of goes a little bit towards motivation a little bit. And in particular, are you familiar with Ryanair and sort of the things that people have talked about in terms of their UX and what they do and so on and so forth?
I don't think I'm familiar with that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, in any case, it's this cheap airline based out of the UK, I believe, and I don't know all the details, but my understanding of it is they have this notoriously bad UX wherein if you don't find the little tiny print and check some box correctly, then your credit card gets charged for 40 pounds of travel insurance, of course, that nobody wants, or so on and so forth, right? And for people who teach UX, it's always like, this is really bad and don't do this. And I guess in terms of motivation, my always thought was, it's not that they did that by accident, right? It's like they did that on purpose because at least at some level it worked. And I guess when I look at the internet nowadays, I just see so much bad UX of that same type. I mean, do you run into that very much, I guess, in your own clients? I mean, that's something that I just see, that people are there's kind of this war between the users and the content providers, and I think the UX people kind of get caught in the middle. Is that something that you ever have encountered or have any thoughts on?
I think, yeah, it's a very wide question and wide problem, and it's not really a war. Business owners have so many things on their plate that some mere UX is not usually on their top list of priorities. So whatever ends up on the big pages, especially corporate pages, and especially things like airlines or whatsoever, there's tons of bad UX there, and that's all right. You have to live in this world, because all those unsolicited redesigns, they're also quite unsubjective, because you never know what kind of committee was there to take all those design decisions that we see on that page. You never know what requirements were made. You never know what the technical limitations were there. But technical limitations probably off topic. But it's a huge, committee, designed by committee thing, distilled by 5 times after it's been originally designed by some poor soul. And really, it's a big battle between probably corporate management and designers, because corporate management tries to instill their value and their understanding of design, and whatever ends up is just a result of that war. It's definitely not the war between designers and users, and definitely not the war between businesses and their clients, because it's all done with good intentions. It just ends up as a monster sometimes. There's a saying that a camel is a horse designed by committee, or something like that.
I like that one.
Right, and there might be let's say they invite you for a redesign. It's not me who's been in this position, because I usually work with businesses who are kind of, UX aware, and if they pay a lot of money to me, that means they're already doing something with their design and ready to undertake changes. But maybe there was such a political challenge doing something that UX just came flying by and never got approached well. And also in such big environments, the gap between the designer and the final user is so huge that you can really, really hardly test and iterate and do whatever best practices are in UX right now. because between deploying I just had a chat a few months ago. I just had a chat with someone from a huge corporate environment, printing credit cards and stuff, and the gap between feature implementation, like the way the UX concept is brought in and the way it's implemented, it's like a few months. So if you try to iterate, it's going to take you a few years to nail just one feature, and there's a ton of features to work on. So it's a tough thing. It's not a war. It's just a process that's not very efficient. I hope that answers your question to some extent.
All right. Well, so with that in mind, actually, with the idea of iteration in mind, how do you like? Are there ways that if you're working to design an interface and maybe you don't really know a lot about your product, it's definitely in the barely beyond ugly phase, a way that you can do that so that you leave room for future iteration, so that you don't lock yourself completely into one set of design decisions or navigation options or things like that?
There's definitely, there is always room for improvement, and the design that you ship, it never really ships, it's never really coded up the same exact way, and just by the time the feature is delivered, it usually looks a little bit different already. There is always space for improvement and for some tweaks and for changes in strategy. It just depends on the strategy, and I should say it more depends on the business owner than on the designer, because we're merely brought in and really cannot control the time when they're going to address us back and come for feedback on something that they do. I used to have a product called Correlation, which was monthly creative direction for SaaS companies. That's where we worked together with the business on an ongoing basis, and we got together every month and reviewed what they did. And even then, we had so many things to work on that we really didn't iterate on something too much. We just addressed different problems in their business. That was still better than regular, come and go design gig.
Well, so I do have more questions for sure, but does anyone here have anything that you guys want some clarity on?
I have some clarity, or a question on clarity. So I'm curious. I have peers and friends in the UX design industry, and I've worked with a few of them. And sometimes, at least here in the United States, I'm not sure how it is in Europe or in Russia, but there's a curious little dynamic around being very specific between what UI is versus UX. Do you mind?
Yeah. Sure. That's what everybody asks. I even get bullied by my audience saying you're saying it wrong. It shouldn't be UI UX. It should be UX UI. I'm like, whatever you say, right? So these are just wide concepts, and last year, I wrote a book called Fundamental UI Design, so I spent a week defining these two to make sure I'm politically correct, because that was the first time in my life I had to sit down and define these. So the UX sphere, it's much wider than UI itself, because it involves whatever we see on the screen, whatever goes in our minds, the whole process and flow, and also a ton of other subjective factors like support. Service is also part of UX, because that's what the user interacts with.
Do you mind actually defining what those acronyms are, just for the sake of our audience?
User experience is UX, and user interface is UI. So user experience, UX, is everything that the person goes through, and the ultimate goal of user experience is making the user successful and making them feel good. While the user interface is probably more a visual term, its origin goes back to human-computer interaction, when it just started out a couple decades ago. And it's about things that people see on the screen, and visual components. Probably sometimes UI refers to the functional side of things, so it's wireframes. I consider sometimes it means visual design, which is high fidelity layouts and styling. Sometimes it means coding up stuff. So it can mean a whole range of things when it comes to actual craft. And people working in the field also have a whole range of crafts, skills. And I've never met two designers with a similar skill set, because everybody has different kinds of things going on. Someone doing wireframes, someone doing like mock-ups in Sketch, someone doing that directly in code. Like myself, I can't code, even though I have education for that. I really regret it. If I could, make my designs, bring them life, I'd probably be one of those people who are considered dangerous when you can do the full cycle from, starting from the concept to implementation. But unfortunately, I have to rely on my developer friends. So, answering that question, UI is probably more in the visual part of things, what exactly goes onto the screen, and UX is a wider range of concepts. And I really, really think that people just spend too much time speculating what exactly this thing means instead of just building good stuff. I think for any articles that makes a difference between UI and UX, if they just focus on something more practical, that would definitely be more beneficial. That's my standpoint. Less speculating, more work. Just build something instead.
Definitely. I think I wanted one quick follow-up question. In terms of UX portion of it, how critical do you feel it's important for teams to engage in user experience research?
Great question. So I think that UX is not only about research. UX is generally about how things work. And I do think it really consists of, let's say 70% is best practices, how things are classically done, established patterns, etc., etc. And the remaining 30% is testing that, doing research and validation, etc., etc. I think it's incredibly important in terms of validating the product, making sure that the users do experience the pain that we're going to solve. But I think the importance of research is a little bit overrated these days, because I've seen teams who are very good at research methods. They can do all kinds of exercises, but the actual design they're iterating upon just lacks quality initially. And it's no good thing to iterate upon something which is not good initially, really, because you should just go and improve it first based on regular common sense. So I think it is definitely important, but you shouldn't rely on this solely. You should build something good first and then iterate upon that using research methods.
Thank you.
That's my very, very painful problem. That's why I'm so worried about it.
How do you mean exactly?
Because smaller businesses, and I come from the bootstrap ecosystem rather than funded startups, with smaller businesses, they usually don't have that much funds for research, like at all. They don't have time, resource, and money for that, and you have to do with whatever is on board, and when you go read articles, it seems like everybody's living in that pink ideal world with unicorns where everybody's testing all blue, and that's really disappointing sometimes.
Cool.
Also, there is a big extreme that people run into is testing everything. Like sometimes it's just good to to trust someone's advice and just do it instead of testing all little things, because testing really depends on the amount of data that you get, and for smaller businesses it's not statistically significant to count on these results most times.
Well, thanks. Did anyone else have questions here before I launch into my own? All right, last chance. No, you have plenty of chances. You can always ask a question in the app. So one thing that you mentioned was that if you could code, you would take your designs from zero to implementation, which in our book makes you a unicorn. But given that you can't, you were talking about working with your developer friends. And one thing that I'm kind of interested in is what is it like from your perspective working with developers? How does that workflow look? I mean, like what is almost a typical day in your life on a project where you're collaborating directly with developers?
I'm
And, like,
I'm actually not collaborating with developers per se as if I would manage them for my own project. Like my own 5-year plan is to become a SaaS founder myself, and that's exactly where I would work with developers in that sense that I would, have to really manage their work. And now it's more like a side-by-side friendly collaboration between. So I mostly interact with the founder, and they give away instructions to developers just in the waterfall manner, sort of things.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I do, like one of the most painful steps, is going back to the live product and pointing out little inconsistencies in design implementation, like spacing here, font size there, like that color is not exactly the same, those margins need to be different, and stuff like that, because these little details, they make sense usually to designers only, while when they're all together, they're kind of responsible for the whole visual polish of the thing. And it's really, really worth the time and money to go back and polish this stuff if you're aiming for high quality design. And it's always very painful because it's tough because it's a very painstaking process. There is a very nice guide by a company called Us2 called Pixel Perfect Precision, I think, something like that. And it's a really, really nice document aimed to bring developers on board with the design fundamentals so that they can more precisely and correctly bring up designs. Let me see if I can drop the link for you.
Sure.
It's pretty old. They're updating it from time to time. So, and the comments?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. There you go.
So it's ustwo.com/ppp. Just for everyone who's watching and listening or reading the transcript. So one thing I wanted to ask, when you're interacting with developers, you were talking about having that phase where they've implemented something, and then you're kind of coming in to do some quality assurance and make sure that it actually looks the way that it's supposed to look. Does it ever work the other way around? What are there times when a developer or an engineer is going to push back to you and say, well, that looks really pretty, but we can't really do that with our constraints, or there's some reason why it's not really possible? Are there occasions where that happens, or where that's a good thing?
Usually not in my practice, because my favorite part of the job is making things easier. So I usually rely on common practices, and I come in to see like a big mess of things and controls, and I try to do the same exact thing with the same exact controls, just in a way more transparent manner. So it's not like they would object simplifying things, and I also not a big fan of like rocket science in tech intense components, which would require weeks of coding. I'm more up for traditional patterns, which have usually very obvious implementation. Sometimes it's all right if not all the bells and whistles are implemented, like not all fancy interactions are in place for the version 1, but that's fine. I mean, and I've really, really matured to be kind of agnostic to these things, not take them personal. So whatever happens is fine, as soon as users like it.
Cool. Other questions from the audience? Any UIs you guys want critiqued? Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I actually have a question. I came late, so I may have missed this part, but do you consider metrics in terms of UX, UI, like load times and like responsiveness? Like, does it work on like a smaller form factor, like a phone screen? Like, I imagine that comes up, in the engineering slash testing part of the UX. But like, do you use those metrics in a way to iterate on future designs, or does that come up in something that would be categorized under user research?
I personally don't go that far into technical implementation of UX. I'm more in the top level of these things, like product strategy and best practices, rather than those metrics that you described. There are definitely specialists out there who do this kind of research. So I cannot really give a qualified answer to that. But it definitely takes place. But I want to highlight that in real life products and problems, it's never that precise, and it's never that perfect, and it's never that like play by the book when it comes to the building process. It's usually like very haphazard, and things are built in such a messy manner that any kind of UX improvement is already a dramatic improvement. Even if it's not powered by dramatic research.
Cool, thank you. And I guess I had another question. Like, I guess in a larger company where they employ like many UX and UI, people, like how do they? I guess I'm just curious to know. Like, I know there's probably a diverse way of doing things, but from your experience, what seems to be like a good way of I guess coming up with a nice UX, like as in what's a good workflow? Do people come up with like a consensus in terms of what things should look like, or is it just generally accepted best practices? Oh, we should just do that, and everyone just agrees to that, or?
You're exactly right. It definitely varies from team to team, like dramatically. We just recorded an episode with Dennis Setiowan, so I have a podcast, and we just talked about UX leadership and the way you approach UX in large companies. Because in large environments, when it's not like creative agencies, when everyone is so on board with great design, but when it's a big enterprise structure, how do you make sure that a single like UX person or design department makes an influence? And the answer here, and I think it should be valid for any company, is getting everyone involved into like UX research practices, and so that when people are involved in something and they commit their own time and energy, they become invested, and therefore always more considerate and always advocating for it as opposed to against it. So the recipe for success in larger companies is to build a small success story, which would allow for like a success narrative to appear, and then go to your next boss with that, so that he can do something else and go to his boss with the same successful narrative, so that he can promote that in terms of funding, etc. And also across a team of designers, or across a team of people from multiple divisions, you can get them all together and try doing basic UX exercises, like putting together user stories, building user profiles, something like that, working with cards like in white paper, so that everyone gets like relaxed and focused on that, and also invested a little bit. In this way, you can slowly instill UX appreciation into the most hardcore, traditional UX agnostic structure, let's say.
Cool, thank you.
Let me drop you the link to that that podcast too. Just a second. It's a really good episode. I recommend it to anyone, because I hear it all the time, what kind of problems people have, and number one problem that all designers have within big structures is actually making people appreciate design.
If you send that to us, we go.
Yeah.
So that's at uiBreakfast.com/21-Danny D.
That's not very user friendly. Maybe you can drop in the show notes or something.
Yeah, that's actually why I was reading it out. Danny-Setiawan. Yeah.
He's the lead UX at The Economist in New York, and he's been leading mobile app creation from scratch. And the Economist was a very, very rigid, large company without any design practices. So we talk about that.
So I have one last one, and then if anyone else wants to ask one last one, just dive right in there after that. So you have one question's worth of time to think, and then I think we'll close it up for the night or the morning or whatever whatever week it is for you. And I guess that's just I'd be really interested to hear what is a project like for you. Like so if you come in and you work with a client who's asking for your services and asking for like some help with their user interface or experience or product strategy. I mean, do you have an example of exactly like what one of those engagements looks like for you? Maybe one of the past ones you've gone through, and sort of like how does it start? How do you what is the problem that you're really trying to solve? How do you solve that problem? And then like how do you interact with the existing team? So kind of like maybe not like a day in the life of you, but maybe like a month in the life of you.
I'll try. So I've done my best to standardize the beginning of engagement, because I've really focused on UI audits. So I have a book called the UI Audit, and I have a consulting offering called the UI Audit. Let me drop a link so that you can kind of explore it if you're curious. That's not the book, that's the consulting thing that I'm doing. And it's really, it's a report that I put together. It takes like a few days to do. uibreakfast.com/custom-audit. So I put together a strategy report, and I also tear down key screens in the app and define what are the biggest problems that we should be addressing here. And I don't do any kind of hands-on design work here. I'm just, applying my best knowledge to see what the problems can be. And then the next stage would probably be wireframing, because after that, people are usually terribly curious and like, so what would be the right way of doing that if that's the wrong one? Not that I do try my best to list all the quick wins in the audit report, but still sometimes it requires like hardcore wireframing work. So the next stage would be wireframing, when we take the key features in the app and do wireframes. I use Balsamiq for it, which is a very nice tool. Pretty cute. Yeah, and Taldi, the founder, is really also very awesome. So yeah, we do. So we do wireframes, and I also like to include like plenty of explanations there. You saw some of my wireframes in the articles, and the ones that clients get, they're even more complicated, but also very nice. So, and after that, there is a way of quickly styling an app, which is putting together a style guide, which is essentially a library of visual elements that you can use to shape the whole app without drawing up like 50 screens. Just because you have the set of necessary elements, the way like tables and menus and forms are styled, and then you can just assemble everything together. So that's like a quick way of styling, or I can do better and put up high fidelity mockups for you. But it's been a while since I did that, because I really shifted my focus towards the strategic part. So it's like graph would be like that. So the majority of clients, they should like that. They would get the audit, and some of them would get wireframes, and some of them would like visual design. I do love doing visual design a ton, and I used to be creative director, and I love it. But I see that it's not the primary value. The primary value is really making the product function right. So it's more about the strategy these days. It's not exactly the one client story, because they do range a ton. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you. Just wanted to get a little bit of clarity into sort of what is it like to work with someone like you. Maybe so that the perspective, when it's inverted, they'll have an idea of like, who is this person who's coming in on our to work with our team and help us make this thing not look awful.
I'm a big fan of productized consulting, which is selling your services with a long form sales page. describing everything, the value of the process and everything to the client, so they don't have the questions that you just answered. Because getting into a relationship with a designer is a very very risky thing, and I understand why people think so. They want to make sure I know what I'm doing, like they don't know what the scope is, they don't know what they need, they don't know like how we can even tackle that, not to mention like the price and the scope and whatever else. So putting like a price tag on things is a really good way of doing consulting, and I really recommend that approach to anyone who is doing like consulting work in the future for you guys. It's really good. Even if it's an expensive price label, it's still better than losing clients because they're scared. I have. Would you accept more links from me?
Of course.
Just a second. So I have a very, very nice webinar on productized consulting, because I think productized consulting is a very important real-life skill. So this webinar is it's called Productized Consulting for Designers, but it's definitely applicable to developers as well, because we're going through like how to put together an offering and stuff like that.
All right. I think unless anyone else have anything on parting notes, parting words?
I do have a few words though.
Okay, perfect.
I'd love to take my free course if you're up for it. It's called 1 Hour UI Audit. Let me. And if you, let me see, did it go there? Oh, twice. All right. Yeah, it actually recaps on everything that we discussed today and walks you through the process. And if you ever decide to buy my book, which is called the UI Audit, I prepared a special discount for you, which is 30% off by using code Viking30. There you go. It will save you a few bucks.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us. I hope everyone here, you guys found it valuable. Everyone who's listening at home, who's gotten this far, I guess you must have. Thanks for joining us at the first Codecast back from our intermission. Jane, especially,
Yay.
Thank you for being with us at a ridiculous hour right now.
Designers and developers make love, not war. Seriously, it is a great match of skills.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Come on back next week, and we'll see you guys around. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you so much,